So yesterday there was an election, and I sort of noticed that between all of the parties, there seemed to sort of be a cooling down of this discussion about housing. And that's something that I think still needs some airtime because it's something that's really important. Obviously, the election's over, the results are in, the PCs have won again. But what I am going to do is I'm going to stress how truly messed up our housing system is because we have a problem, and I honestly don't know if anybody can solve our housing problems. So I'm going to be explaining why builders aren't actually the problem, and there's this weird rhetoric kind of going around that like builders are greedy and evil, and I'm going to tell you why that's actually really not true and honestly a bad way to think about this problem. I'm also going to talk about the current government's legislation scorecard. So how are they doing compared to what they said they would do? Has the new legislation that they've tried to put into place for housing actually done anything and had measurable results? I'm also going to talk about why this whole idea of like, oh, we can only build condos is not really going to be the solution that we need. I'm also going to talk about some really bold ideas that need to happen and the source that they came from that really quite surprised me. So that's what the topics are about today. Hopefully you find it educational, interesting, useful, maybe convince a few of you to try and get your MPs and elected people talking about this so that we make really, really bold changes, because there's literally no other way we are getting out of this mess unless we completely change the way that we're thinking, because it's become very evident now that we are not very good at this housing thing. And the amount of factors that influence housing is super long, and I could probably talk about it for a really long time. If you want to kind of learn a bit more about some of the factors, I did write a post, so you can go and check that out. It's titled "Why Are Rentals Affordable All of a Sudden?" and it sort of talks about different supply factors. Just to name a few major ones that have sort of led to the situation that we're in, a big one is something known as exclusionary zoning, i.e. only allowing one type of housing to be built on one particular lot, making it very hard to change that zoning to allow a different housing type. We've had a huge lack of investment in trades for over 30 years. I also wrote a post on that, so you can go check that out. We have high construction and development costs, so this kind of relates to the previous point, a lack of labor and just high costs in general that everybody is feeling. We also had the problem of uncontrolled migration. And the important point here isn't that necessarily migration is a bad thing. Generally, it's viewed as a good thing because it helps us replace our population at a sustainable rate for our economy. But the crutch here is that we did not have housing to meet the new demand that migration brought in, which you can make the argument then, if we don't have supply to meet the new demand, why are we inducing more demand? We also put policies into place around the 90s. Governments were trying to cut spending, which led to a lack of purpose-built rental housing. So in 2022, the provincial government asked for something called the Housing Affordability Task Force, which basically went out and researched the housing crisis in specifically the province of Ontario and talked about various things that the provincial government could do and implement in order to try and improve the situation. In this report, they very plainly stated that our problem will not be solved with measures to cool housing. Cooling measures may include things like higher interest rates, which the governments themselves don't really control. That's the mandate of the Bank of Canada. More tax-advantaged accounts, higher leverage down payments, tax rebates, mortgage stress tests, and other incentives. While all of these things may be nice, they don't deal with the heart of the issue, which is a lack of construction. So how do we make building easier? The big elephant in the background is zoning. And that's because people don't really hear about this too much. Our provincial and municipal land planning legislation, which you can kind of boil down to zoning, is set up in such a way that it makes it nearly impossible for us to build anything other than single-family homes or mega skyscraper condos. If you look to a city like Milton, which is a suburb kind of north of Oakville, they are developing old farmland there like crazy, and they're putting in single-family homes, or at best, townhomes. Maybe a few condo apartments here and there on Main Street, but it kind of like drives me mental to see the brand new city getting built the same old way. Like, where are the thoughts to transit, cycling, rental apartments next to the brand new university that's going in there, or multiplexes like the one that I am living in right now in a quiet residential street? For some strange reason, we just have this aversion to building a variety of housing, specifically small to medium-sized apartment buildings on the same lot that a single-family home can go on. Milton does a great job of proving how our past failures are continuing to show up in our current attitudes and future legislation. Now, you might look to a new city like Milton and say, hey, like maybe the builders are the problem. Like maybe it's only profitable for them to build these, townhomes or single family homes. Let's say that a builder in an existing neighborhood proposes to put in a 15-story condo apartment building on the corner lot next to the main road, and everybody inside of this pristine residential neighborhood gets annoyed and upset because they feel like this builder is going to ruin their neighborhood by putting in more housing units. Or another example that I saw recently was that they wanted to expand an assisted living facility in what I would argue is quite a downtown area of Toronto. A couple of local streets that had single family townhomes, etc. God forbid that we try to add more height to help our overstressed healthcare system, the people who own these homes may end up living in someday. Like, God forbid. People are like, oh, these builders, like, how dare they try to change anything about my neighborhood? Imagine the traffic. Imagine the shadows. Like, don't blame the builders. They are doing exactly what any rational person would do in their shoes. If the zoning laws say, sorry, but 98% of this neighborhood, we won't allow you to buy up a few houses next to each other, redevelop it into a 4-story, 20 to 30 unit apartment building, adding 17 units of supply instead of the 3 houses that were there before. Instead, you have to build single family homes, or you can take on the big timeline risk of trying to put up a huge condo tower. Those are the only options that are financially feasible to the builders. By being so defensive over it, you are literally increasing the price of houses because of the increased cost to the builders. And the people that pay for that are the people who want to live there. We could build a bunch of little apartments that slowly add supply to our cities and grow with the times. Instead of having only one or the other, we could have something in between. Maybe we do some trickery with the architecture and make it look nice, and then boom, on the inside you have 5 units instead of 1. We can do that. People are doing that. Places, provinces, countries are doing that. I don't understand why our laws are the way they are. As I was saying, builders will do what they are able to accomplish within the law, or they will do the math on fighting the law and figure that if I have to spend 5 years fighting all of these community groups in the city and all going through this crazy long approval process, of which Ontario has one of the longest in all of Canada and probably North America, same thing goes for builders who subdivide and build single-family homes in brand new city on old farmland. It's probably well within the law to do so. It's an easy win for them. So logically, what we have to do is make other types of housing developments and redevelopments as easy of a win for builders as building single-family homes are. And we have to seriously cut down the friction. So let's talk about an old example of what we did right. So I recently moved to Toronto and I live kind of a few blocks away from a main road, and there's like a little bit of a commerce area with restaurants, businesses, and that kind of thing that's just adjacent to the street that I'm living on. The street I'm living on was built in the 1930s, and it's exclusively 3 to 4 story apartment buildings just kind of lined up next to each other. If you go further into my neighborhood, you will find homes that are almost exclusively detached single-family homes. On the same lot, these apartment buildings house 20 to 30 families compared to 1. But if you look into the City of Toronto bylaws and zoning, it would be illegal to build more of these apartments today in the same region. Not because they're unsafe. We have 2 fully functional staircases and a connected fire alarm system. Because of arbitrary rules, stupid arbitrary rules like zoning lot coverage, parking regulations, and regulations that prevent changing zoning, even where it would make a lot of sense. Our approval process for changing what's called the official plan is like a 10-year process. Like it's built into the way that we do things. We literally can't change things for like 10 years at a time, and it's bizarre. Building more housing like the one that I'm in right now makes a ton of sense. And until you've lived in it yourself and you've kind of seen what the different options are, because I grew up with my parents in a suburb in a single family home, and I've lived in 2 apartments like this now in different cities, you can see which is just kind of a more efficient, better use of space, and think to yourself, why on earth are we not allowed to build this anymore? Like, it just makes sense. And we can even point to other models that seem to be working, which are doing the exact thing I just mentioned. If you've ever been to a suburb of Montreal or Montreal itself, you'll notice that they do a lot of what I am preaching. They build a large variety of different housing types in a residential neighborhood where in Ontario you'd only see single-family homes, and this provides a variety of options for people who want to live in that area and reduces pressure on housing supply. I also mentioned in my last post that the way legislation is designed in Montreal allows builders to be flexible with the type of housing that they're putting on a lot, depending on what makes the most sense at that moment in time or when they complete the build. This flexibility that's built into the law allows them to do a much better job at meeting demand. And yes, it means things will change. I'm suggesting replacing our current laws with ones that are proven to work, such as those in Quebec. Maybe they're not perfect, but they seem to be working a whole lot better than what we have here. This line from the executive summary of the Provincial Housing Task Force, which I mentioned earlier, sums it up pretty well. The way housing is approved and built was designed for a different era when the province was less constrained by space and had fewer people, but it no longer meets the needs of Ontarians. That's a pretty good summary, and honestly, if you haven't read this task force summary, you should go read it because it's very based. So now that I've kind of explained what I think needs to change on like the fundamental level, let's talk about what changes the provincial government has made and how it's been going so far. So in 2022, we saw Bill 23 introduced, which was the More Homes Built Faster Act, which aimed to reduce red tape for housing construction. This bill was passed in direct response to the Housing Task Force recommendations of building 1.5 million homes by 2031, which I'll get back to in a moment. But one key change that this new legislation had was that you can now build up to three residential units on land zoned single-family residential without needing a zoning change. This includes construction of laneway homes and garden suites or accessory dwelling units. Sources vary on what the actual numbers are now that we are 3 years past this legislation. In Toronto, where there are about 420,000 lots that may qualify for an ADU, a grand total of, get this, 126 have been built since this change 3 years ago. And it is a high lift kind of activity that requires a lot of participation from a lot of different people. But even if we assumed a super generous estimate of 1,000 units per year for the next 2 or 3 years, once more people get wind of this, this kind of tweak to our current legislation is most likely going to work out to a rounding error. It's not going to make a dent. Okay, what else did they include in Bill 23? For rental developments of 4 or more units, proposed reducing development charges by 15 to 25%, depending on the unit size. According to the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, this will explain how we've been doing so far. Among Canada's 3 largest cities, Montreal posted a 112% increase in actual housing starts in January. Vancouver recorded a 37% increase, and these were driven by higher multifamily unit starts. In Toronto, with our brand new legislation of cutting development charges, starts have fallen by 41% from last year. I wonder what Montreal is doing. 112% increase in housing starts over the same period that ours dropped 41%. Like, can we get some of that over here? There's a really big question mark that I have about all of this. Like, why is Toronto slowing down while Montreal is doubling? What on earth are we still doing wrong? Because we just passed this legislation 3 years ago that was supposed to be like big, grand, and make all these changes. And nothing's happening. And the answer mostly lies in the fact that investors aren't finding condos as appealing of an investment anymore. And we categorize these condo apartments purchased as investment as multifamily unit starts. But what this shows is that while we tried, we still haven't managed to legislate a housing type into existence in this province that varies from either single family or a 50-story condo tower. We haven't provided the right type of funding, we haven't cut the right type of development charges, and we haven't provided the right type of rules for people to work within to solve this problem. Let's talk about another major change in Bill 23. The idea with the Ontario Land Tribunal was to speed up the process of getting developments passed. In human speak, they wanted to stop NIMBYs from causing delays in our development process. Fundamentally, I think this is a good idea. There's proven data that NIMBYs being able to delay the development process adds mountains of costs that ultimately get passed on to the end renters or owners of the unit, and it also makes building less appealing to builders due to the timeline risk of these changes maybe passing, maybe not passing. However, even though I can kind of look at this as like a positive thing that, maybe it will speed up developments by, call it a year or two, the fundamental change is still not there. This rule was passed on a faulty foundation. That foundation is our zoning bylaws. We need to change them to, say it with me, allow a variety of housing types. What this effectively has accomplished is speeding up these mega projects that I've been talking about that, to be fair to residents of existing areas, often seem a bit unwieldy and unnecessary, when there could be a lot of smaller projects in the area that achieve the same amount of housing in a more graduated and gentle way. But you always hear people complaining about greedy builders who want to ruin the neighborhoods when it's literally our fault that they're resorting to this. Like, it's our own legislation that's handcuffing us. A side effect of introducing this middle-of-the-road housing would likely also enable a greater number of construction companies to take on these smaller projects. The barrier to construction is very high for this high-density housing. They require special, often custom-engineered, massive rebar concrete and other materials that can either be hard to ship, have to be built on site, which increase complications, increases costs, and increases the amount of time that it takes to complete these units. However, I am still going to give this part of the legislation a half point, since I think the idea behind it was generally positive, as it does deal with the problem of these really long development timelines. But I think it's still a drop in the bucket since there are so many other delays that continue to plague building, and it's not really a solution. It's just kind of a band-aid on top of an existing problem. What are the results saying, and what are the projections? According to this table from Statistics Canada, Ontario housing starts have gone down every single year since the provincial government's Housing Task Force report in 2022. Now, I'm not going to turn a blind eye to the fact that the overall economic environment is pretty bad as far as construction and labor costs go. People's appetite for investment with these high interest rates is down, and there's a slew of other problems we're dealing with that are related to the economy. If they used an above average year of housing starts, which was 2021, as a baseline, which was 100,000, and then you take that above average year and you project out and you say, well, I think we can do 150,000 next year. It's like, yeah, right. And how exactly do you plan to do that overnight? It's not going to happen. We can't expect changes to happen that quickly, but we also can't be affording to go backwards, which we are doing now. The data is clearly showing that our changes have not been bold enough. We need more shovels and we need more people to dig. Ontario is still failing. I heard this really interesting thing the other day, which I thought was kind of fascinating. But so I hope that some people are able to become traders to the status quo. because we need some traders right now in order to fix our issues. I don't think it will happen. I honestly don't really have much hope. I'm probably just talking into the void. I hope that somebody can make some real impactful changes that won't be just a disguise for furthering your personal interests or anything like that. I think people need to start taking a more data-driven approach to the change that is required, which is very hard to do in the current way that our societies are functioning with the internet and everybody kind of having these loudspeakers and emotional stuff and everything. But whoever it is will have to make unpopular decisions, and I just hope that those unpopular decisions are backed by data and proven success from other places around the world. That's my 2 cents. If you want to read this in paper form, you can go to my website. I have a bunch of other articles talking about this type of thing there as well. Thanks for watching the video. Remember, get bold, get wacky, get crazy, change the fundamental structure of our society. Huge ask, I know. Probably not going to happen, I know. But someone's got to do it.
Back it up! There's a kid back there!
I'm in danger!
That's my call. Do something, everybody.